So let me go ahead and see if I can share my content. All right. Can I get someone to tell me whether they can see the slides on their screen, please? Okay. All righty. So I want to first off reintroduce myself. My name is Ms. Toriante. I'm currently a master's candidate at George Mason University, earning my master's in education, curriculum instruction, with a specialty in secondary education and English language arts. And as part of my requirements for this semester, the expectation is that I would teach a short lesson to the class that I'm observing. Since you are reading The Word for World is Forest, I thought it would be a good idea to discuss a companion text to The Word for World is Forest. So I settled on an historical comic book by Gord Hill on indigenous resistance. So when I say indigenous resistance or indigenous, how many of you, do you know what I'm referring to? Okay. I believe I do. So when I talk about indigenous, I'm talking about Native people, particularly in this instance, Native Americans or Native people of the Americas. So that would include the indigenous people that were in Canada, what's now Canada, the US, and South and Central America. So this book that I selected is a graphic novel, excuse me, written by Canadian Gord Hill. He's a Canadian artist, writer, and woodcarver with the Kawak Nation, and I hope I'm pronouncing that close to correct. And a lot of his artwork and a lot of his graphic novels that he writes are all centered around social justice issues, so around indigenous rights. How many of you read comic books? How many of you read comic books?
So I think they're using the agree and disagree buttons.
Oh, where is that?
So if you go to the participant list, you can see the green and red. So if you guys can select your response again, that would be great.
So go to the attendees list.
And you see the little red and green checks and X's?
Yes, I do now. Thank you very much. Excellent. So for those of you who are familiar with comic books, you'll know that comic book as a genre is more than just superheroes and the struggle between good and evil. Much more nuanced. It's much more richer than that. in recent years, comic book artists have used that genre to explore issues of social justice. Just like the book March, or the series, the graphic novel series March, that details the history around the civil rights movement. And that was actually written by John Lewis, a civil rights activist and the late congressman. It's meant to capture history, just like March, but also like Persepolis, which is an autobiographical graphic novel of a girl growing up in Iran, particularly during the Iranian Revolution in the 1970s. And then finally, comic books, we know, can be aspirational. When you think about the Black Panther series and how that was written by Ta-Nehisi Coates, who is a eminent voice and writer of his generation for the African American community, where he was tasked deliberately by Marvel to reboot the Black Panther franchise, in which he took the opportunity to make it a very aspirational, an aspirational comic book that integrated the best of African American culture, or African culture, I should say. So, what we're going to do today is we're going to do a breakout where I've gone ahead and assigned you into 4 groups, where each of you will read a different selection of 500 Years of Resistance. There's a discussion guide in which then, once you're done reading, I'm going to ask that you get together, turn on your mics, and talk to each other about what you just read. The discussion guide is basically designed to help you make connections between the 2 texts, between the historical comic book and the science fiction comic book, the science fiction novel. And then I want you to be prepared to share out. Again, we're going to have a conversation about the historic comic book and the science fiction genre, and see if you can find the connections between the 2. Do I have any questions at this time? Okay, seeing none. So group 1, so Ms. Andrews will go ahead and put you in breakout rooms. Group 1 will do the invasion. Group 2 will read about the Inca insurgency. Group 3 will read the war on the coast. And Group 4 will read the unconquered Mapuche. And Ms. Andrews, did we decide whether we wanted to give them a slide to capture their responses, or do we want them just to?
I think we can discuss it first and then come back and they can share out, and then we can capture their responses on the slide afterwards.
Okay, that sounds good.
All right, so I'm going to send you all into breakout groups now, and I will copy and paste the groups in the chat so that way you guys can see it. All right, you're going into breakout groups now. You guys may want to use your headphones, just an FYI. And let me put these groups. Okay. And you guys can find the copies in the week 31 folder.
So I'll give them like 2 minutes to find the text before I join the group.
Yeah, that sounds good. It looks like most of them have reconnected in the group, a couple of them anyway.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool.
How many kids are in your class physically there today? Miss Andrews, how many kids are in your class physically there with you today?
I was on mute. I think I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7. I'm trying to get
wow.
my headphones to work so when I go in groups it won't. But they're not working.
All right, well, I'm going to go into group 4.
Okay, cool.
And then I'll work my way up.
All right. There we go. Headphones. All right, so you should be rejoining the session. So let's go ahead and get started with our brief discussion on what you guys discussed or talked about. You don't have to go through all of the discussion questions that you discussed, but just kind of give an overview. So before we get started, can one person from each group, if you were the designee from your group, can you raise your hand? And that way I'll know who to call on. And you can just tell us a little bit about the text that you read. So I got 3 people, and I know there were 4 groups. So that 4th group, I'm not sure. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have our 4 volunteers. Awesome, great. So let's start off with Nathan, and if you could tell a little bit about the text that you read. Give me a second to turn my volume down so it doesn't do that weird echo thing. And yeah, so you can go ahead. Yeah, you can talk.
So I was in group 3 where we summarized the Year of Resistance War on the Coast.
Can you speak up a little bit? I can't hear you.
Okay. I was in group 3. We talked about the War on the Coast part. There was a lot of similarities to the World for Willard is Forest, such as the Russians pressed natives into working for them, and the Europeans attacked the native people several times. However, unlike in the book, the natives also attacked the Europeans first on several occasions, so it's like less clear one side is definitely the bad one and one is the less bad one, definitely. So that was something we noted.
Thank you for that. Let's move on to, and I'm going to turn this up. The second person with their hand raised is Edward, and Edward, you're in here as well, so I'm going to turn my speaker volume down so that way we can hear you. Can you tell a little bit about your text, and can you maybe talk about any connections that you see or any of those questions that you see addressed, or maybe summarize your conversation?
Yeah, so I was in group 4 and we looked at the unconquered Mapji, and in this this comic they talk about a figure Lautaro, and so this he escaped from enslavement and went back to his people and taught them a lot about weapons and how to fight, and he organized them. And so he organized them, and then they were able to fight back against the conquerors. And so they remained undefeated for a long time, and they still are defending their lands on their reservations. So one thing that we found that was similar was that character or the figure Lautaro, and so we kind of connected him to Silver, because Silver kind of went back to the Ashtians and kind of rallied them together, and he was able to better figure out how to defend, and he was actually like planning to attack back, kind of like this figure, and how he's able to organize his people to resist.
Thank you. Can you remind me, you had which group were you? I'm just trying to keep up. Which group were you at?
We were group 4.
Group 4. And Nathan, what group were you?
3.
3. Okay. So let's work our way up the list. Which group? I see Maria's hand. I see Ebenezer's hand now. All right. So Maria, go ahead, and if you can speak for your group, what were your takeaways?
Okay, so I was in group 1. We read The Invasion. Basically, it was basically like a list of all the atrocities committed by the invaders that stole Native Americans' lands. There's definitely a clear connection with the World for World is Forest, where the Native Americans are the Ashtians. who had no choice, but they were kind of weak at the time to protect their land. But then we do see some resistance. There was actually a successful attack on the invaders' army, and yeah, that's the connection.
Very good. I'm sorry I dropped off earlier.
All right, and Ebenezer, you can go ahead for group 4.
This is I was in group 2 and we read income yeah. It was basically about incomes against the Spaniards that were coming to invade their land, and we related it to the book The Word for World is Forest because in the same way Don was doing the same thing to the Ashlands. But for the fourth question, we also answered that the author was highlighting issues of imperialism and pushing one's ideals onto other groups. And that's something that we see both in the book and this comic.
All right, thank you for that. Ms. Toriente, did you have anything that you wanted to close them with?
Sorry, I was talking and my audio was off. No, I think they did a good job. Did any of you did reading the two texts make you any in terms of questions that you want to follow up with? Did it make you curious to learn about anything else? Maria.
After reading my chapter, I was just wondering what the intent of the book was because I didn't see a very clear storyline. It was more of just a list of events occurring. So I was wondering if it was maybe made in a response to a social movement, or like how did the author just decide to make this historically accurate comic, and like who were they trying to reach? Yeah.
Well, I think those are very good questions. You're asking who the audience is and what the purpose of retelling this. So can you remind me which selection you read?
It was The Invasion.
Okay. So that first part basically is meant to lay out, as you said, the history of the colonization of the Americas. And the writer, as I mentioned earlier, the writer is someone who comes from an indigenous background. He uses his art form, which is art and writing, to make graphic novels, to raise awareness of social justice issues. And the one issue that he's very passionate about is indigenous rights. So the other class had brought up the point about history, about it being told from a point of view that you don't usually see. So if you think about this, when you study history and social studies, what's the viewpoint you're getting?
Usually it's whatever the school teaches us, probably whoever came up with it, people in power.
People in power, exactly. So there's a phrase known as history's written by the victors. And what that refers to is whoever is the, I guess, prevailing group in authority, be it political or social economic or based on a ethnic group, the group that's in power usually gets to tell their side of the story because they have a systematic way to distribute that information. Gord Hill saw that there was a story that needed to be told from the viewpoint of the people that were conquered or resisted this colonization.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a
Does
lot of
that
sense.
answer your question?
Yeah,
No?
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thank you.
So I would advise that whenever you read anything, always have in mind not only what the subject matter is, but what the author's intent is and how this is being distributed. That's not to say that you should challenge everything, but you should definitely question and have that in the back of your mind, because if there's one side of the story, then there's probably another side to the story that should be sought out to get a complete picture, to make a good judgment in terms of what you think about something, to help you form your own opinions. Anything else? In the book, The War for World, each chapter is a different perspective, so we get a small glimpse of each character. Exactly. So you're getting different perspectives on the issue. And so if the book had just been written in the voice of the commander, what kind of perspective do you think you would have? A one-sided story. So do you think you would have more empathy for the colonists if it was just their side of the story? Good. All right. So I know that Ms. Andrews talked a little bit about what the word for world is in terms of as a story. Can you think of the literature term that would fit what the word for world is, Forrest, in terms of what it's meant to represent? What type of literary terminology you would use for it? I hope I'm phrasing that question right, Ms. Andrews. Yes, Nathan, it's an allegory. So it's an allegory for Can anyone share what they think it's an allegory for? Exactly. Colonization. Very good. And let me ask you this. Had any of you seen that connection before reading the graphic novel text? Yes. Nathan, you had seen that connection before? Okay. All right. Background knowledge. Yes. So sometimes when you have background knowledge, you're able to make that connection easily. But don't feel, I mean, a lot of times people don't get that, don't pick up on that. You have background knowledge. That's true. The captain does model himself on the conquistadors. Alrighty. Does anyone else have any questions? I feel like this has been a really good discussion, but I don't want to take up too much of your time. Any closing thoughts? Well, I want to thank you for letting me share this text with you and for allowing me to be part of your discussion and your journey of discovery with the word for world is forest. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over back to your teacher.
Thank you. All right, so let's take a quick break and then we will